Hi everybody, this is Chris Haughey. Thank you for joining me on Create with Chris. Today we're diving into a snail's tale. This sweet little snail and his ladybug friends are enjoying a sunny day, and I'm going to show you how to bring them to life with some fun, unexpected tricks and techniques. Whether you are a brand new painter or have a brush in your hand every day, this one is packed with tips that will surprise you and have you saying, I can't believe that worked. So grab your brushes, get comfy, and let's jump right in. Today I am sealing my MDF surface with white Adirondack chalk paint, and I'm using a small base coat sponge just to smooth it on. It's a great way to cover it quickly, evenly, and it just gives a nice bright base. I can lightly sand it when it's dry and the surface is silky smooth. I've loaded my 3/4 inch oval wash with Spa Blue. It's fairly thinned so I can move the paint around quite a bit. I got a little dry, just grab some more water. I'm using a slip slap stroke, which is more the side of the brush than the chisel tip of the brush. Starting out a little stronger at the top, and as I walk it down toward the middle, I'm just going to pick up more water instead of more paint and just gently let it blend out. Picked up foliage green on my brush and I'm starting in the bottom, and I'm just going to do the same thing, that soft slip slap stroke, walk it up to the middle and just softly, slightly blend it in. Just these colors work together so well. Don't worry about brush strokes, you just want soft movement. Afterwards, I put a second coat on. Now I'm picking up just a little bit of plantation pine to darken that bottom and the sides, blending it together just rather quietly. I like to show a lot of movement in the background. Also, if it's a little bit, I don't want to say blotchy, but it shows stroke work, it's also going to look like distant foliage. I'm going back with Aqua Sky on the toe of my 3/4 inch angle brush, and I'm just going to float it around the top and down the sides. It just helps to give more substance to the sky area. Doing the same thing again with plantation pine just to reinforce that darkness on the sides and in the corners across the bottom. Using that 3/4 inch angle, it has extra long bristles so I can go quite a distance before I have to reload. Just kind of blend them together. Because the blue and green work so well together, blending them together just creates another pretty color. Loaded my number 12 Fantastic Filbert with Coral Buzz. This is a new color by Decorative, and I'll tell you, talk about a color with a powerful presence. This is so vibrant and bright, and I thought this would be just perfect for my base color underneath the red, and it truly is so vibrant, it just really ramps up the coverage. Just putting it on nice and smooth, just a nice even coat. I like using a filbert when I'm working with rounded shapes. Just super easy to get those nice soft curves and rounded edges. I don't have to work so hard. While that is drying, I'm going to bump down to the stem and underneath the cap. I'm using almandine. I am using my number 12 flat. Using the chisel edge just to sharpen anything up. This is a base coat, but I still want to go with the direction of whatever I'm painting. Picked up just a hint of raw sienna, and I'm just going to darken underneath the cap, start to pull out those little ridges using the chisel edge. So I use the flat of the brush to shade, and then I'm going to pick up some more and just pull down those pinwheels or the ridges, and you can see how that starts to build it up. I believe some of that underpainting wasn't quite dry, which is fine. I'm just going to go back and pull it in from the bottom up, and letting some of those colors show through can also be a plus. Adding some raw sienna on the sides of the stem. My light source is mostly from the top and the left, so the underneath the cap and the right side is just going to be a little stronger, more shaded. This is watermelon slice, and it's such a bright red, but I'm telling you, over top of that coral buzz, I thought I had the wrong color. I had to check my bottle because there was such a distinction between, I normally use coral or a pink base, but this was so much brighter that I just really wasn't sure I had the right color. But look how it resonates over that coral buzz, just absolutely beautiful. I just want to float that on nice and smooth, and I'm just going to toggle between that almondine and the raw sienna to make sure that I get a nice area underneath the cap. This is a little bit of raw umber, and I'm just adding some darker shading. Raw umber is a very strong color, so it doesn't take much to really make a difference. Keep the floats light and minimal, as more can always be added, and too much will make it look dirty and kind of overwhelm it. Staying on the chisel edge of the brush and just putting hints of that raw umber on those ridges. Adding a little more raw umber on the right side of the mushroom will enhance that shading, and this is still a very light float of color. It's almost just a hint of color. If it gets too bright, grab a little of the almondine to brighten that center up. Staying on the chisel edge of my brush, just pulling a few short strokes, make those ridges prominent. This is crimson red. I'm using it to shade along the bottom and the right side of the mushroom cap. This is another new Deco Art color, absolutely gorgeous. It does lean a little bit on the translucent side, so when it's applied over deeper, richer colors like this watermelon slice, it really adds a beautiful shading that complements it wonderfully. Using my diverse dry brush to add some highlights, I've loaded the brush with Snow White, wipe it on a paper towel, and then just gently dry brush until I achieve the brightness desired. The dry brushes are almost magical. They are just wonderful to use. Drop down to a smaller one to do the rim, and look how easily I can pull that highlight out. I always like to add an unusual color, so I picked Cherry Merlot to deepen the shading on the mushroom cap, just along the right side and the bottom. And I wondered what it would do if I added just a hint of this color in the shading on the mushroom. So I put just a little bit down those ridges on the cap and also down the stem. My stem looked a little bit dull, so I just went back with my dry brush to dry brush some highlights in there. I am using a bubble explosion stencil to create the dots on the mushrooms. It's so easy to do this. You can use any circle stencil or even paint them on. But because of the shape of the mushroom, I didn't want to get it in the background. I used another one of my painter templates to just mask off that area. So much easier than using tape. And I forgot to take down my base stencil, and please remember to tape it down because it will move around, especially if you're using two stencils. I loaded my stencil brush with Snow White, wiped it on a paper towel, and just very gently swirled it lightly to kind of dry brush that on there. And I allowed it to be a little bit brighter on the top and the left side by going over it a couple times, keeping that right side just a little bit lighter and softer, and that will look like almost like shading. You can see how it fades out toward the right side. Isn't that wonderful? Such an easy way, and it looks so perfect. I did kind of sketch on my daisies. I'm using my filbert to create the petals. Don't be fussy about this. I put 2 strokes on each petal, pull it toward the center. Don't worry about the center area being solid or filled in. There's going to be a center painted on, but you can see I'm just starting, and I don't particularly care if my petals are perfectly rounded on the end. Sometimes that little bit of a ruffle looks more natural, but just 2 strokes. I reload probably after 2 petals, but my filberts are a little bit longer in length, so I hold more paint on it and I don't have to reload as often. Saves me time, and it makes it look better. Having the petals alter in size also makes them a little more natural, a little more interesting. So don't worry about each petal being perfect or each flower being exactly round and facing the front. Loaded my Epic script liner with plantation pine, just kind of placing where I want my stems to be and my leaf branches. And I'll go back later and add more, but this helps me to know where everything's going to be placed. And my paint's very thin. You can see I wipe it off with my finger. If I don't like the way it looks, I probably should use a paper towel, but my fingers are always handy and right there. Grabbed a little bit of that plantation pine on the toe of my brush just to scoot around the base of the mushroom and the flower petals. And I just want it to kind of softly blend in the background. So I'm not worried about it. Anything in particular. I keep those strokes fairly horizontal. I don't want it to look like it's on a hillside. I do let it dry in between each application, using my filbert to press down and kind of pull to a point. The leaves are very easy to create, press, twist, pull. Once you get the hang of it, you can go rather quickly. The size of the leaves can be altered according to the amount of pressure that is applied, and I just keep these a little bit on the not solid heavy side, a little more translucent. I definitely want them to show up, but they don't have to be super dark and heavy, especially those ones in the distant background. And I kind of pop those in after the paint runs out or thins out on my brush. Going back with Baby Duck and my filbert to put those flower centers in. And I'm not making sure they're round. I just want to get that center filled in. They don't have to be perfect. If you want perfect ones, you can use a stencil, but I think it's a little more fun if they're a little bit more natural. This is celery shoot, and I've just scooted a little bit across the ground to give a bit of highlight in there. Use my finger to blend it out. I'm using my 1/4 inch angle to highlight the leaves with celery shoot. Just want to be careful that they don't blend into the background too much. So I kind of, on the ones that match the background, I kind of bumped it down a little bit so they're not blending in. Always looks a little bit brighter when the paint's wet. It will tone down just a little bit. But this is just adding some more values to the leaves. I picked up a touch of Spa Blue on my angle, and I'm shading or floating it on the shaded side of the leaves. Oh my gosh, this makes such a huge difference. Look what it does to those leaves. It doesn't read as blue. It kind of reflects the sky, adds a little bit of coolness down in those deep dark areas of the foliage. I can go on the chisel edge of my brush and add a little bit on the stems. It's just a beautiful accent. Very unexpected, but look how it works so well as opposed to just going with a darker green. I did grab my Epic script liner just to hone in on those little tiny flower stems and leaf branches. Look how that helps them really pop out from the background. All those brush strokes in the background just kind of disappear and look like foliage. I added little veins in the center of the leaves here and there. Anything that was too blended into the background, I can use my Epic script liner to really pull it out. And this will lighten up as it dries, so my paint is very, very thin. Adding some little blades of grass here and there around the base of the stem. These little tiny details are what makes it look very intricate. I did go back with plantation pine, add a few more brush strokes, and little blades of grass. These are the little details that you can spend a little more time on just to create that look of intricate line work. And it makes such a big difference having these little tiny details. Not everywhere. I didn't do it solid, just a few here and there. And remember, the ladybug's going to be on the left side, so I kind of left that area just a little more open. I didn't want it to get too busy. Added just a hint of spa blue on these flower petals. I want them to be white, but I still want it to have more color than just white. Not on solidly, more in the shaded areas, highlights on the top left, and the spa blue just a little bit around the base of the petals, maybe some more on the shaded side. I went back with Snow White to brighten some of the tips up, and you can see how this really starts to differentiate the brightness from the darkness on these flowers. Look how much brighter that becomes. Snow White tones down as it dries, so I did go back several times. Keep an eye on it. If your flowers lose their brightness, go back and just brighten them up just a hint. Using my 1/8 inch angle and raw sienna, shading around the base of the flower center. And see, it really didn't matter if they were perfectly round. They look great now with just that little bit of shading. I do go heavier on the bottom and the right side, but on some of them I went completely around. Just keep that shading a little bit softer. Raw sienna, this is what I'm using to add shading at the base of the flowers and pull down some veins. This is such a heavy, intense color, so it can overwhelm the flower very, very easily. I'm almost using like 80% water and 1%. You can see on my palette, my little area that I'm working has almost all water and just very, very little paint. My goodness, it just doesn't take much at all to add that hint of color. The first one I did was a little bit heavier than I intended, and so I'll probably have to go back and brighten that one up a little bit. More can always be added so much easier than if it's too much to pull it away. If it gets too dark, like that one, just grab a little more water on the brush and blend it out. It's super easy because the paint is so loose and movable that it's easy to work with it and put it where it needs to be. I put the shadows just a little heavier on the right side. They all kind of dip down toward the flower center, so I'll allow it to be around the entire flower, but maybe heavier on the petals on that right side or along the bottom. Wherever the shading's added is just really going to determine the shape of the flower and the way the petals are in the sunlight. And you can see I just used almost all water, but just a hint of color. What a huge difference that makes. And it's almost magical to watch that shading just kind of transform. If it's transparent and just a hint of color, it looks like a shadow. Shadows are transparent and just a hint of color. I can still see that blue showing through the shading. Decided to add a little more sparkle in the flowers, so I'm dip dotting the highlights on the centers with my stylus. Started out with the bigger end, and I had to flip it over, make the dots a little tinier. When they're tiny like that, they're just a little more delicate. I have to add a shadow on the stem. I'm just using that raw umber, just mimicking the shape of the flowers and the petals. Base coating the snail, and I'm using the number 12 Fantastic Filbert, and I can just very easily create those rounded shapes. Doing each section individually, that helps create those layers and ridges, and look how easily that forms. Don't worry about it being perfect. Take your time and follow the outline so that it is defined, and the brush strokes are going to go in the direction of each section. And I kind of did the outside here because it was a little thinner, and then I'll go and do the inside around that shell. But you can see how I follow each section. and just blend it together. And the brush strokes are a little bit visible, but that's okay. I'll work with that, and I'll show you what I mean by that here when we get ready to add the color. Doing the same thing with the shell, it kind of spirals around. I don't want to have to retrace my lines that I sketched on, so I'm using my brush to follow that spiral, and because the brush strokes will be visible, I'm not so sure you can see them on camera, but they will be very distinct when I go to add my shading. And I can just follow those spiral around, and then when I go to add my shading, it'll be super easy and I won't have to retrace all that. Loading the toe of my 3/8 inch angle with foliage green, and I just want to float it down the outer sides or around the outer sides of the head to start building that dimension and enhance the shape. Just a very light float. This is not heavy or solid. Now I'm just going to scoop it down the side and kind of pull it across the bottom of each one of those body sections. It's a very non-exact float. I call it my wash float, where you just add that hint of color. And this is the first of many layers of shading or highlighting. When they all work together, it's going to look fantastic. Each layer does not have to be exact and perfect. You remember my motto, a little bit of color makes a big difference. And we're just starting to build that roundness of the body, enhance those different segments of his body, and I think that just adds a little more whimsy and makes him a little cuter. Now I do one side and let it dry. I did grab my radical round to, I don't know what you call those, eye stems. So I added a little color on those. The body has dried, and now I can go back and very easily just add the other side with a little bit of shading. And I'm using the 3/8 inch angle and the foliage green. Just continue that on. And you look how round and full his body looks with just what little bit has been done. While that's drying, I'm going to jump up to the shell. Picked up some raw sienna on the toe of my angle. This is another very, very light float. Because it's twisted around, it's going to have shading on both sides of the shell or on the twist. So I do one side, let it dry, and then do the other one. This is not a smooth, even float. In my mind, the shell has segments, so if I float on that shading with little short floats and kind of pull up, it automatically creates those segments or sections. Doesn't make it smooth and even. Now that's dry, I can go in on the other side and add a little bit of shading. Had to figure out that center section because it does twist around. It can get a little confusing, but once the shading is added in, it starts to become very defined and very obvious where the shading and the highlight needs to be added. Again, the highlight comes from the top left, so that bottom section and the right section of all of it is going to be a little bit darker. I'm going back to the body with plantation pine, and this is where I enhance or deepen the shading on the bottom and the right side. And look how that really starts to bring that to life. Just stayed on the chisel edge of my toe of the brush to do those little eye stem areas. And I'm just doing each section individually. So it's a short thing, a short float across, pull it down, pull it down. Look how easy that is, and what a great result that is achieved from that. I did let it dry. I'm going back with raw umber, and this is such a strong color. I'm still using just a hint of color, mostly water. This can read or become dirty very easily, so it just takes a little float of color. Keep that very transparent and loose. Going in with my dry brush to add some highlights. I'm using Snow White. Loaded my brush, wipe it on a paper towel, make sure it's not heavy, gently dry brush it. This is the easiest way to add highlights, and they look fantastic every time. This dry brushes can be used for so many different things. That's why I called it diverse. But to add the highlights is beautiful and is so easy. And look how that shell just starts to really turn into a dimensional object. Doing the center of his face and then the middle of each one of those body sections. Don't try to rush the dry brush. It just takes a little bit of patience, and make sure that the underpainting, which is the area behind it, is nice and dry, and just gently dry brush that on. You can add as many layers as you want. Wanted to add little speckles on his shell, and I was going to take this section out because it didn't work. I'm using raw sienna and my stylus, and it just became too polka dot, and so I went in with a damp paper towel. I really like my shading and highlighting. I didn't want to remove that, so I just wet sanded with my paper towel very, very lightly to diminish the spots on those polka dots. And after I did that, I wanted to add some freckles on the snail, so I went in with my number 2 radical round, thinned the paint down tremendously. Again, it's about 80% water and about 20% paint. And I'm just touching to add little speckles or freckles. Started with the left side. It was a very light freckling, and then after I was confident that this is the route I wanted to go, I could go ahead and just reinforce that and add some freckles in there a little bit stronger. It's always those little touches that are added that ramp it up and make it look so much better. I am going in now to add the eyes, and I'm not good at circles, so I'm using my Painter's Pal template to stencil the eyes Snow White. I've loaded my spectacular stencil brush with Snow White, center it over the eyeball, and then stencil it in. Make sure to wipe off this template after each application, and it will take 2 layers of paint to get a nice opaque eyeball. I loaded my Epic script liner with soft black to line the mouth, and then to make it look like it's really where it needs to be, I shaded a little bit of plantation pine below the mouth and then a little bit of soft or Snow White on the top. To add the iris, I'm using Aqua Sky and just a smaller circle on the template, and then the larger end on my stylus to dip dot a soft black pupil right in the middle. I wanted to add that little bit of cherry merlot that I put on the mushroom. I thought it might look good on the snail body, but I wasn't sure, so I started out very lightly and very softly. What a wonderful combination. Red and green usually make brown, so the cherry merlot leans a little bit toward the red, and with this plantation pine shading, it just really adds a rich tone that truly makes a difference. And I'm just putting it where the darkest shaded areas are. It's not a solid float, it's just a stroke. You can see each section, just a little hint of color here and there, and not solid and intense. It's just a hint of color. A little bit of color makes a big difference, and it's so obvious with something like this. It just brings that interesting tone in there. And then I use my smaller brush to do those eye stems. And then I wondered what would happen if I added this cherry merlot on the shell. And look what it does. It really warms it up, pulls everything together. I call this my connecting thread. When you can pull a color just very quietly throughout the design, and you can see that it doesn't change the color much, it just enhances the color that's already there. Just kind of an amazing result. Just little bits here and there, and it doesn't change the intensity of the shading, it just adds a hint of color. And then why not add just a touch to the flowers? So I just put a teeny tiny bit on the toe of my angle brush. Same concept, a tremendous amount of water, just a hint of color on the petals. It just really ramps them up so much, and it's not on every single petal. It's not all the same. It's just a little bit here and there. And don't try to do one whole flower. Do a couple petals here and there and on all of them, and then take a peek at it. I thought it would be fun to add some in the ground, and when I did that, it looks like a really rich shadow. So that's a great way. And then I thought, well, maybe I could add some hints of leaves in the background. So I just kind of tapped a little bit throughout the background. Again, it's just very transparent. Loaded my number 2 radical round with foliage green to paint the eyelids, and then I picked up my 1/8 inch angle with a little bit of plantation pine to shade both sides to give that dimension on the eyes. I floated just a hint of soft black just below the eyelids, right over the iris and the pupil, and that just gives a little dimension. Added some highlights on the middle of the eyelid with the toe of my angle. It doesn't take much, just a little bit. And loading my Epic script liner with soft black to pull a thin line across the bottom of the eyelid, and then flip out a couple eyelashes, and then add that cute little sparkle. Look what a difference the sparkle in the eye makes. It's all these little touches that make a really nice difference. And then I highlighted with my Epic script liner and Snow White, just a hint. And the paint is thinned down quite a bit, so with the camera it looks pretty intense, but as it dries it will soften and become a little muted. I can always go back and add more, but I start out very lightly. I thought maybe I should highlight the shell because it is such a loose paint and water. I can remove it very easily if it's too much or it doesn't look right. I'm using my radical round to base coat the ladybug with that coral buzz. This is the same color that I did the mushroom cap, and I just want to continue that bright red throughout. So all of the ladybugs, I'm just outlining very carefully and then filling it in very smoothly. Let it dry, and then I will top coat it with watermelon slice. And this is just a smooth, even top coat. But with that coral buzz underneath, it just really pops it and makes it look really a rich, strong red. I did take my diverse dry brush and highlight the centers with a little bit of Snow White, and then I shaded around the right and bottom side with a little bit of Crimson Tide. Using soft black now to paint the heads, line the antenna, and I switched over to my Epic script liner to do that. And these are just nice long strokes. Make sure that paint is thin so it flows off of the brush very easily. Picked up a little bit of Cherry Merlot. I'm just pulling that same continuing thread that I used on everywhere to kind of pull the ladybugs into that same color family. Keep this very light. You don't want to turn these ladybugs dark. A hint of raw umber underneath the ladybugs to add a little shadow. I thinned down soft black to paint the spots on the ladybugs. I didn't want them super strong and super black, but I definitely wanted them to be visible. And I just used my round to kind of paint those in. I thought it needed something else, so I picked up a little bit of Stormy on the toe of my 1/2 inch angle just to add a bit more color to the top and the sides of the sky area, and I just pulled it down and blended it into the green. And then I thought, well, maybe it would look pretty in the corners, and it really does. It makes it look very cool and shaded. This is celery shoot. I'm just on the chisel edge of my brush to add a stronger hint of sunshine down below, and look what the dimension that creates. I've used a lot of dimension on this, and it's just all in the layering. I wanted to highlight some of those little blades of grass. These are little details that definitely show up, definitely make a difference. Not everywhere, but where that sunlight is the strongest or where that highlight is the strongest, pull some of those blades in and it looks amazing. Take your time and put these little pieces of grass where they will make a big difference. I did use my diverse dry brush and just kind of added a hint of celery shoot. I wanted the background to sparkle a little bit more, but I didn't want it to look like falling snow. If I'd thought about it before, this should be done before everything is painted. So in the instructions, and everything is listed below, in the instructions, the splattering will be before everything's painted. It just makes it a little easier. The splatters were just a little bit too strong, so I blotted them down with a damp paper towel. After I did that, let it dry, add a little bit of strength to that stormy, and I love the way that blue looks over that aqua sky and then down in the corners. To finish this up, I removed all of the tracing lines and sealed it with a couple light coats of ultra matte varnish. And that's our little snail's tail all wrapped up. I love how this turned out, and I hope you picked up a few tips and techniques to make your painting journey a little easier and a whole lot more fun. All of the supplies I use are listed in the links below, so be sure to check that out. And hey, if you do paint this project, I'd love to see your version. Share it with me. I'm always inspired by your work. If you're enjoying these tutorials, please like, hit the bell, and subscribe, and be sure to share with your artsy friends. That way you won't miss a single painting adventure. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or just want to say hi. I love hearing from you. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I can't wait to paint with you again soon. And remember, a little bit of paint makes a big difference.